Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. On the morning of July 24th, President Xi Jinping met with European Council President Costa and European Commission President von der Leyen at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, during the 25th China-EU leaders meeting held in China. During the meeting, President Xi said that the more severe and complex the international situation becomes, the more China and the EU need to enhance mutual trust. He described both China and the EU as big players in the international community, and emphasized the need to firmly grasp the development of China-EU relations. President Xi emphasized that the challenges Europe is currently facing do not come from China. He said that China-EU leaders should make strategic choices that can stand the test of history and provide the world with more stability and certainty. The China-EU leaders reiterated that, in the current international situation marked by turmoil and change, it is crucial for all countries, especially major economies, to maintain policy continuity and stability, and to intensify efforts to address climate change. This was strongly emphasized by the China-EU leaders. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement are the fundamental guidelines for international climate cooperation. The China-EU Green Partnership is an important component of the China-EU Partnership, and green cooperation is a distinctive hallmark of China-EU collaboration. Both sides have a solid foundation for cooperation in the field of green transition, as well as broad space for further collaboration. Both parties agreed to jointly play a leading role, promoting a global just transition while advancing sustainable development and poverty eradication. To uphold the core status of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement, and to fully and accurately implement their goals and principles. Both sides also agreed to strengthen practical actions, using systematic policy frameworks and solid measures to turn their respective climate goals into tangible results. So, did both sides also agree to this? To accelerate the global deployment of renewable energy, promote the flow of high-quality green technologies and products, and ensure that all countries, including developing nations, can access and use them. To be able to afford and make good use of them, strengthening efforts and support for adapting to climate change, in order to drive large-scale action at all levels, from local to global. Both sides also proposed to submit their 2035 nationally determined contributions before the 30th Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is, before COP30. The nationally determined contributions from both sides will cover the entire economy, including all greenhouse gases, and will be in line with the long-term temperature goals of the Paris Agreement. They will strengthen bilateral cooperation in areas such as energy transition, climate adaptation, methane emission control, market mechanisms, and green low-carbon technologies, working together to promote their respective green and low-carbon transformation processes. To sum up a few observations, first, the most substantial consensus reached at this China-EU summit is the joint effort to address the issue of climate warming. Europeans believe that there is a lot of competition between China and Europe, but when it comes to the issue of climate change, China is seen as an indispensable partner for cooperation. Second, on the topic of climate change, while Trump took a completely negative stance and even withdrew from the agreement, climate governance is still regarded as an important crisis that humanity faces together on a global scale. On this issue, China and Europe's emphasis on cooperation will be recognized by countries in the global south, and at the same time, it is also a joint stance against the American hegemony represented by Trump. This is also a political manifestation. Third, in recent times, the EU has frequently provoked disputes with China, repeatedly hyping up so-called issues like China's overcapacity and de-risking from China. On the eve of the summit, the EU's 18th round of sanctions against Russia even included the names of Chinese companies and financial institutions. Some Western media have also been amplifying the tense atmosphere between China and Europe. It's believed that the Chinese side will not have overly high expectations for this summit either, but one thing worth noting is that this China-EU summit was originally supposed to be held in Europe, but in order to have a face-to-face meeting with President Xi, EU leaders were willing to come to China to co-host and participate in the summit. This demonstrates the EU's willingness to engage in dialogue and cooperation with China, so China will not turn them away either. Fourth, the consensus on climate issues is a long-term strategy. Global warming is a major issue that concerns the survival of humanity. If China can become a leading promoter on this topic, it can take the initiative from a moral high ground. In fact, some traditional mainstream media in the United States are increasingly worried that Trump's America First policy will bring more uncertainty to the world, fearing that America's global leadership will not be maintained. On July 23, a columnist for Foreign Affairs in the U.S., Ishan Tharoor published an article in the Washington Post's Today's Worldview column, analyzing that the Trump administration is self-destructing and weakening America's soft power, launching indiscriminate tariff wars against allies, and steadily eroding America's alliance system. The article believes that China's strategy is to remain unchanged in the face of shifting circumstances, ignoring Trump's own turmoil. Farrow also harshly criticized Trump's policy of cutting clean energy subsidies. He said that the United States has made a huge mistake, giving China a tremendous advantage, and believes that in a certain sense, the US is unilaterally disarming itself, or will end up pushing the West toward marginalization. First, he criticized Trump's actions in cutting funding to the U.S. Agency for Global Media, USAM. Currently, USAM and its many government-affiliated media outlets are in a precarious situation. In the article, Farrow believes that since USAM, which oversees several government mouthpiece media including Voice of America, has faced budget cuts, Chinese media's airtime around the world has started to increase, and China's perspective on global events has begun to dominate broadcasts in various countries. He said that Trump and the Republicans regard media outlets like Voice of America as suspicious sources of anti-American liberalism, but Trump's actions only serve to please the Chinese side. Farrow harshly criticized Trump for prioritizing loyalty when appointing people, and for forming a government efficiency unit under the banner of eliminating corruption, waste, and inefficiency, which actually just purges dissent within the government. In Farrow's view, Trump's tariff policies based on the America First principle are even more of a grave mistake. He said that supporters of America First claim their reforms are rescuing the country from the doldrums of liberalism. They don't necessarily want America's dominance on the world stage to end, but they've found that the White House is creating chaos every week, while China remains unflinching. The article believes that Trump's unpredictability has given China an opportunity. Lu Zhongwan, a researcher at the Council on Foreign Relations, said that the breakdown in bilateral trade has caused American manufacturers fall into difficulties. China, by imposing export controls on rare earths, has discovered a powerful tool to inflict pain on American companies. Lu Zhongwan pointed out that China may not want to fight a trade war, but they would rather decouple than bow to Trump. The article then cites the analysis of Ali Yang, an expert from the US-based International Crisis Group, in an attempt to interpret China's response strategy. According to Arn's summary, in the face of Trump's threats, China has generally adopted three main strategies. The first is to work hard to increase trade with other countries and regions to counter the impact of US protectionist measures. The second is to join the international community in criticizing the Trump administration's America First policy. The third is to seek more momentum and greater leverage to promote the emergence of a 21st century international order. Farrow believes that before the Trump administration helped boost China's international standing, Biden administration official Julian Gewertz recently said in an interview that China's current assessment is that the United States is systematically dismantling the sources of its own power. Compared to before, China now believes that the US is dismantling these alliances, distancing itself from most parts of the world, and dismantling the American technological ecosystem. In various ways, it is cutting funding to top universities and making it extremely unattractive, or even completely impossible, for foreign talent to conduct research at American universities. This is further eroding America's global influence. China believes that, in a sense, the US is unilaterally doing this. The article also points out that the Trump administration's blow to America's soft power and its credibility among allies and partners may be irreversible. Yen believes that he is not sure if, in history, there has ever been any other great power in office that has so quickly and systematically attacked the main sources of its own competitive advantage. According to Professor Margaret Macmillan, a distinguished historian at Oxford University, if Trump's hostility toward alliances continues, if he keeps insulting, belittling, and even economically harming America's long-term partners, the United States will find the world becoming increasingly unfriendly toward it. Earlier this month, Trump signed a major U.S. tax and spending bill, marking this controversial legislation's progress into law. This also means that Republicans have succeeded in making cuts. Hundreds of billions of dollars in federal clean energy subsidies and clean energy tax incentives will be gradually phased out by the end of 2027. The article argues that in the crucial field of green technology, Trump, by revoking the Biden administration's support for renewable energy and doubling down on fossil fuels, has given China a huge advantage. It goes on to say that China is rapidly becoming the leader in driving the world's energy transition. In the final part of the article, Farrow cites a recent analysis by Adam Tooze, a Columbia University history professor and director of the European Institute, pointing out that the United States has made a major mistake in the field of renewable energy. On a podcast aired on July 16, TUS compared renewable energy to the largest organized modernization experiment to date, and this field has changed the rules of the game. TUS points out that over the past 20 years, every imaginable alternative energy hub has been closely tied to China. At this point, the energy transition has basically become a Chinese issue, with 75% of renewable energy projects currently coming from China. He further says that Americans could have organized an alliance, but instead made a huge mistake, with enormous consequences. Europeans keep moving forward, but their economy is stagnating, with almost no growth. He says that, in fact, energy demand in many regions is declining. Europeans are trying to innovate in energy through a zero-sum game approach, but China's experience shows everyone that development is the key. Economic growth is the real key to understanding how to achieve a truly rapid energy transformation. Tusi points out that this really does feel powerless. This is the moment when the West, as the core driving force of world history, is truly stepping down. This paints a real picture of the West being marginalized. To put it simply, viewpoints like Terrell's represent the traditional Western elite. Although there are limitations due to ideological thinking, they also highlight a key issue. The lofty image of the West, represented by the United States, will disappear even faster because of Trump's strategies.